That morning, the sky was clear, and the sun shone brightly over the village of Nika. It was the perfect day for a wedding. I was finally getting married to Kelechi, the love of my life. He was everything I ever wanted, kind, caring, and he always made me feel special. We had been planning this day for months, and now, it was here. Before I put on my wedding gown, Kelechi called me. His voice sounded so happy, so full of joy. We laughed and talked about our first dance as husband and wife. Kelechi was an amazing dancer, but whenever we danced, he would pretend to let me win, just to make me feel special. That was one of the many things I loved about him. He always made me feel important. Before he hung up, Kelechi said, "See you later," and I smiled, not knowing those words would haunt me for the next 2 years. We were following the customs of our church, so Kelechi and I spent the night in different hotels. As I arrived at the church, everyone was already there, waiting to celebrate. My heart pounded with excitement. I hugged my soon-to-be in-laws, and they admired how beautiful I looked in my white gown, but something felt wrong. I hadn't seen my mother or my sister. My father had passed away a few years ago, so their absence was even more noticeable. I asked my cousins if they had seen them, but they didn't know where they were. Some of them said they saw my mom earlier, but she had disappeared. I started to get nervous. I tried calling my mom and sister, but neither of them picked up. My hands trembled as I dialed Kelechi's number. He didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing. Panic crept into my chest, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I looked around. Everyone was smiling, waiting for the wedding to start, but they didn't know what was happening. My heart was racing now. Why wasn't Kelechi answering? Where were my mom and sister? Minutes turned into hours. Kelechi's phone was switched off. Confusion spread among the guests. My in-laws were just as confused as I was, and soon, whispers filled the church. I ran out of the church, the sound of my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Back at home, I ripped off my gown and sat on the floor, staring at the walls, trying to understand what had just happened. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. The pain sat deep inside me, too heavy to even express. For 2 years, I lived with that pain, searching for answers, wondering why Kelechi never showed up, why my mother and sister had disappeared. I felt broken, lost. Every time I saw a wedding, the memories came flooding back. And the heart felt fresh again. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was an international number. My heart skipped a beat as I answered, "Hello." I said, my voice shaky. On the other end, I heard a familiar voice. It was my mother. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with guilt. I stood frozen, unable to speak, my mind racing. I stood there, holding the phone, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. My mother, after 2 years of silence, was suddenly on the line. "Sorry for what?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. There was a long pause on her end, and I could hear her breathing deeply as if trying to find the courage to speak. "For everything," she finally said. "For what happened that day. For not being there." My heart pounded in my chest. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice growing stronger, the pain and anger from that day boiling up inside me. I didn't want to go along with it, but I didn't have a choice, she said, her voice cracking. "It was all a mistake, but your father, before he passed, he had made arrangements." "Arrangements?" I repeated, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Kelechi. He was never supposed to marry you," she said. "Your father promised you to someone else, long before you met him." I felt like the world was spinning around me. "What do you mean?" "Who?" "His name is Obina," she whispered. "Your father's closest friend's son." When your father fell sick, he made a deal. Obina's family paid for his medical treatment, and in return, your father promised your hand in marriage. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My father, the man I loved and trusted, had promised me to someone I didn't even know. And Kelechi? What about him? Kelechi found out the morning of the wedding, she continued. He didn't know until then. Your sister and I, we had no idea what to do. We tried to stop it, but by the time we realized, Kelechi had already left. I sat down, my knees weak. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but instead of feeling relief, I felt betrayed. So, Kelechi left because of some deal my father made. Why didn't anyone tell me? We thought it would be best to protect you from the truth, my mother said, her voice trembling. We thought you'd be happy with Kelechi, and we hoped the deal wouldn't matter. But when Kelechi found out, he couldn't go through with the wedding. He didn't want to marry you under those circumstances. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They flowed freely down my face, all the pain from the past 2 years pouring out of me. But I loved him, I cried. I loved him, and he left me there. Humiliated, without a word. Why didn't he tell me? I don't know, my daughter. I'm so sorry, my mother said softly. We all made mistakes. Silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. I wiped my eyes, trying to catch my breath. Where is Kelechi now? I asked. I don't know, my mother replied. He left the country shortly after. He was heartbroken too, but I don't know where he went. Obina's family tried to push the marriage, but I refused. I won't let them force you into something you don't want. The weight of our words sank into me. My whole life had been turned upside down because of secrets and promises I never knew about. But now, I was left with more questions than answers. Come back home, my mother pleaded. Let's talk this through. You deserve to know everything. I stared out the window, my heart aching. Could I really go back? Could I face the truth that had been hidden from me for so long? I need time to think, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I understand, my mother replied softly. But remember, we love you. I love you. She hung up, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat there for hours, replaying the conversation in my mind, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. My father's promise. Kelechi's disappearance. The secret that had shattered my life, and yet, there was a small part of me that wanted to know more. What happened to Kelechi? Could I ever forgive him? Could I forgive my family? The question swirled in my mind as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. My journey for answers wasn't over yet. There was still more to uncover, more truth to face. And I knew, deep down, that I would have to return to Nika to find them, but the path ahead was uncertain, and I couldn't shake the feeling that even more secrets lay hidden, waiting to be revealed. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I barely slept. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Kelechi, my mother, and the terrible secret my father had taken to his grave. How could everything I believed in be so wrong? I avoided talking to anyone, not even my closest friends. I was afraid if I said the words out loud, it would make it all real. But no matter how much I tried to push it away, I knew I couldn't run from the truth forever. I had to go back to Nika and face what I had left behind. The thought of returning filled me with dread, but I also felt a strange pull, like something was drawing me back. Maybe it was the need for closure. Or maybe it was hope, the faint hope that I might find Kelechi, get the answers I so desperately needed. The morning I decided to leave, I packed a small bag. As I stepped out of my apartment, the air felt heavy with uncertainty, but also with a strange sense of purpose. This time, I wasn't running away from the past. I was going to confront it. When I arrived in Nika, everything looked the same, but it felt different. The village streets were quiet, and the familiar smell of roasted plantains and fresh corn filled the air. I made my way to my mother's house. My heart pounding in my chest with every step. When I knocked on the door, it opened almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for me. My mother stood there, her eyes filled with both relief and guilt. She didn't say a word. Instead, she stepped aside, letting me in. We sat at the small wooden table in the kitchen, the silence between us heavy and awkward. I didn't know where to begin, but finally, I broke the stillness. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice steady but filled with pain. My mother sighed deeply, rubbing her temples as if the weight of the past 2 years had finally caught up with her. "Your father and Obina's father were friends for a long time. When your father fell sick, we didn't have the money for his treatment. Obina's family stepped in and paid for everything. In return, your father promised them you would marry Obina." I listened, feeling the sting of betrayal with every word she spoke. "Kelechi didn't know about the arrangement," she continued. "We didn't think it would matter because you and Kelechi were already so in love. We thought the deal would never come up. But the morning of the wedding, Obina showed up." I clenched my fist. Obina came that morning. Why didn't anyone tell me? "Obina threatened to take over our family business and lands if the wedding went through," she said quietly. "Obina also threatened Kelechi. Kelechi couldn't handle it, so he left." I shook my head, tears filling my eyes. "And you? You just let this happen?" "I was trapped," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to lose you, and I didn't want to dishonor your father's memory. So I kept quiet, hoping it would all work out somehow. But I was wrong. I failed you." Silence filled the room again, thick with all the emotions I was trying to process. "Where's Obina now?" I finally asked. My voice cold. "His family left Ndika not long after the wedding," my mother said. "He moved to the city. I haven't heard from him since." I stood up, feeling restless. "And Kelechi? You have no idea where he is?" My mother shook her head. "I've tried to find him, but no one knows where he went. He just disappeared." I left the house soon after, my heart heavier than when I'd arrived. I walked through the village, the memories of my life here flashing through my mind. Everything felt tainted now, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I needed to find Kelechi. I needed to understand why he hadn't come to me, why he had left me to suffer in silence. I needed to know if there was still something left between us. Or if the love we had shared was truly gone. The search wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined. I couldn't keep living in this shadow of pain and betrayal. Somewhere, Kelechi had answers, and I was going to find him, even if it meant uncovering more secrets than I was ready to face. The sun was beginning to set as I walked back toward my childhood home, but in my heart, I felt the stirrings of a new beginning. This wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. I had just started my journey when I noticed a familiar figure standing in the distance, near the edge of the village. My heart skipped a beat. It was him, Kelechi. He was back. My heart raced as I froze in place, staring at Kelechi. I hadn't seen him in 2 long years, but there he was, standing at the edge of the village, looking exactly as I remembered, tall, composed, and with that same thoughtful expression that always made me wonder what was going on inside his mind. I didn't know whether to run toward him or turn away. The pain of his disappearance still felt fresh, and part of me wanted to demand answers. But another part of me wanted to stay silent, to avoid reopening the wounds that had barely begun to heal. Kelechi took a few steps closer, and for a moment, our eyes met. My breath caught in my throat. He didn't look away, but his face was tense, as though he knew this confrontation was long overdue. Finally, I took a deep breath and started walking toward him. With each step, my emotions bubbled to the surface: anger, hurt, confusion. By the time I reached him, I didn't know where to begin. The words I had rehearsed in my head for 2 years seemed to vanish, leaving me standing there in silence. Kelechi spoke first, his voice soft but filled with regret. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, but they didn't feel like enough. Not after everything that had happened. I shook my head, trying to control the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "Why, Kelechi?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. "Why did you leave me like that? Why didn't you tell me what was going on?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when he was nervous. "I found out about the arrangement with Obinna on the morning of our wedding. It felt like my whole world collapsed. I didn't know how to face you after that." "But you didn't even try," I said, my voice rising. "You just disappeared. You left me standing there, humiliated, with no explanation. Do you have any idea how that felt?" His eyes dropped to the ground, and for a moment, he looked as broken as I had felt for the past 2 years. "I thought you would hate me if you knew. I thought you wouldn't want to marry me anymore, knowing what your father had done. I didn't want to be the reason for your pain." I took a step closer, my anger simmering beneath the surface. "You were the reason for my pain, Kelechi. Not because of my father's deal, but because you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You made that decision for me." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want to make things worse." I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "But you did. You left me in the dark, and I've been living in that darkness ever since. I needed you, Kelechi. I needed answers, and you left me with nothing." Kelechi stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "I know I made a mistake. I've regretted it every single day since then. But I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if you would ever forgive me." His words hit me hard, but I wasn't ready to let go of the hurt just yet. "You could have come back. You could have talked to me, explained everything. But instead, you ran away. And now, after all this time, you show up like nothing happened." He winced, and for a moment, I saw the same Kelechi I had fallen in love with, the man who had always been gentle, who had always cared about my feelings. But that man had hurt me deeply, and I wasn't sure if I could ever trust him again. "I didn't come back because I thought you'd moved on," he said quietly. "I heard about Obinna's family leaving, and I thought maybe you'd found someone else." I shook my head, my anger giving way to exhaustion. "I didn't move on, Kelechi. I couldn't. I've spent the last 2 years trying to understand what happened, trying to pick up the pieces of my life. And now, you're standing here, and I don't know what to do." He took another step closer, his voice barely a whisper. "I never stopped loving you. I know I don't deserve another chance, but if you let me, I want to make things right." My heart ached at his words. I had dreamed of hearing him say that for so long, but now that he was here, I didn't know if I could trust it. The scars from that day were still too raw. I closed my eyes, trying to think, but my mind was clouded with emotion. When I opened them again, Kelechi was watching me with a look of desperation, like he was waiting for me to decide his fate. "I need time," I said softly, stepping back. "I can't just pretend like nothing happened. You hurt me, Kelechi. And I don't know if I can forgive you." He nodded slowly, his face full of regret. "I understand. I'll wait." for as long as it takes. I turned and walked away, my heart heavy with confusion. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to let go of the pain and start over. But another part of me wasn't sure if I could trust him again. As I walked back toward my house, I felt the weight of the past 2 years pressing down on me, but now, there was something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope this wasn't the end. Not yet. But whether Kelechi and I could ever go back to what we had. That was a question only time could answer. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog. I couldn't shake the image of Kelechi standing there, his face full of regret. His words kept replaying in my mind, I never stopped loving you. I'll wait, for as long as it takes. But even though he said he was sorry, the hurt hadn't gone away. I wasn't sure if it ever would. I spent most of my time in the house, avoiding people, avoiding my mother. The village was small, and everyone had already heard that Kelechi was back. Whispers floated through the air whenever I passed. People looked at me with curiosity, pity even, wondering if we would get back together or if our love story had truly ended. One afternoon, I decided to leave the house and clear my head. I couldn't stand the weight of the walls closing in on me any longer. I wandered through the village, past the old mango trees and the market where I used to buy fresh vegetables with my mother. Everything looked so familiar, yet it felt so different now. I didn't have a destination in mind, but my feet eventually led me to the river where Kelechi and I used to go when we needed to escape the world. The river was where we had shared our dreams, where we had first said I love you, where we had imagined a future together. But standing there now, the place felt like a ghost of what it used to be. As I stood by the water's edge, the sound of the river rushing over the rocks, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there he was again, Kelechi. It seemed like the universe was pushing us together, whether I was ready for it or not. I didn't expect to see you here, he said quietly, keeping his distance. I didn't expect to be here, I replied, my voice steady despite the swirl of emotions inside me. He took a deep breath. This was always our place, he said, his eyes softening. I've thought about it a lot since I've been gone. I didn't know if you'd come here anymore. I crossed my arms, unsure of what to say. There was so much history between us, so much pain mixed with all the good memories. It was hard to know which ones would win out. Why did you come back, Kelechi? I asked, turning to face him fully. After all this time, why now? He looked down at the ground, kicking a pebble with his shoe. I couldn't stay away any longer. I know I hurt you, and I know I left when I shouldn't have. But I've been thinking about you every day since I left. I came back because I had to see you, to try and make things right. I let out a shaky breath. But how? How do we fix something so broken? He stepped forward, his face filled with emotion. We can't fix the past. I know that. But we can try to rebuild. If you still feel anything for me, we can take it slow. I'll earn your trust back if you let me. I stared at him, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to believe him, to believe that we could pick up the pieces and start over. But another part of me, the part that had lived with the pain for 2 years, was afraid. Afraid that trusting him again would only lead to more heartbreak. I don't know if I can do that, I said softly, shaking my head. You left me at the worst moment of my life. How do I know you won't leave again? Kelechi's eyes filled with sadness. You don't. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, but I can promise I won't run again. I've learned that running doesn't solve anything. It just makes the pain worse. We stood there in silence, the sound of the river filling the space between us. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel like we could get back to the place we were before. But the road ahead looked long, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to walk it. As I turned to leave, I heard him call out. "Please, Neka," he said, his voice pleading. "Just give me a chance. That's all I'm asking for." I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. I could feel the weight of his words, the sincerity in them. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my thoughts, but the truth was that no matter how much I wanted to push him away, part of me still cared. Part of me still loved him, without looking back. I said, "I need time." And with that, I walked away, leaving him standing by the river, just like he had left me at the altar 2 years ago. Back at home, my mother watched me with worried eyes. She hadn't asked me any more questions since I'd returned, but I could tell she wanted to know what had happened with Kelechi. I could barely understand it myself. All I knew was that I needed space to think, to decide what I wanted, but the village wasn't giving me that space. The whispers had turned into rumors. People were already talking about how Kelechi was back for good, about how we were destined to get married after all, as if the past 2 years had been some minor inconvenience. I needed to escape the noise, to clear my head away from all the eyes and the pressure of expectations. So, I made a decision. I would leave Nika again, just for a while, to think things through. This time, I wasn't running away from the pain. I was searching for clarity. I told my mother over dinner. "I'm going back to the city, Mama. I need some time." Her face fell, but she nodded slowly. "I understand," she said softly. "But promise me you'll come back." I gave her a small smile. "I will. I just need to figure things out." As I packed my bags, my mind was still filled with unanswered questions. What was I supposed to do with the love that still lingered between me and Kelechi? Could I ever truly forgive him, or was our story meant to end in this endless cycle of hurt? As I boarded the bus back to the city, I realized that the answers wouldn't come easily. But one thing was certain, this chapter wasn't over yet. There were still more secrets to uncover, more decisions to make, and as the bus rumbled along the dusty roads, I couldn't help but wonder if fate had something else in store for me, something I hadn't yet seen in the city. The familiar noise and hustle felt like a welcome distraction from the mess of emotions swirling in my heart. The tall buildings, crowded markets, and the buzz of everyday life made it easier to drown out the constant thoughts of Kelechi, of the past, of what could have been. But as the days passed, I couldn't avoid the memories forever. I had left Nika, but Kelechi still lingered in my mind. I threw myself into work, trying to stay busy. I hadn't told anyone here about what had happened with Kelechi, not my friends, not even my closest coworker, Ayo. It was easier that way. The less I talked about it, the less real it seemed. But every time I was alone, lying in bed at night, or when the world quieted down for just a moment, my mind drifted back to him. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself scrolling through old pictures on my phone. There it was, the photo of me and Kelechi from 2 years ago, the day he proposed. We were both laughing, standing by that same river where we had just spoken a few days ago. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. It was hard to believe how much had changed since then. A knock at the door snapped me out of my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. When I did, I was surprised to see Ayo standing there, a concerned look on his face. Ayo is my friend. We have been friends since university days. "Hey, Neka," he said, stepping inside. "You've been distant lately. I thought I'd check on you." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just busy with work." Ayo raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "Is that really it? You've seemed distracted. And I know when you're hiding something." I sighed, knowing I couldn't keep it to myself forever. It's complicated, Eo. It's about Kelechi. He frowned, pulling a chair closer to me. What happened? You haven't mentioned him in so long. I sat down, my heart heavy as I explained everything, how Kelechi had left me at the altar, how I had gone back to Nika and discovered the truth about my father's deal with Obina's family, how Kelechi had returned and asked for a second chance. By the time I finished, Eo was staring at me, wide-eyed. That's a lot, he said, shaking his head. I don't even know what to say. Neither do I admitted. I don't know if I can ever trust him again, but part of me still loves him. And now that he's back, I'm torn between the past and the future. Eo leaned forward, his voice gentle. Neka, you've been through so much. It's okay to take your time. No one can tell you what's right for you. But maybe you need to stop running and face these feelings head on. Talk to him, figure out what you really want. His words hit me hard, but deep down, I knew he was right. I had been avoiding making a decision, hoping that time and distance would make everything clear. But the truth was, I needed to confront my feelings, and that meant talking to Kelechi again. I couldn't keep running from the past. A week later, I found myself back on the road to Nika. The drive felt long, and with each passing mile, my heart beat faster. I wasn't sure what I would say to Kelechi, or if I was even ready to hear what he had to say, but I knew I couldn't avoid it anymore. When I arrived in the village, the air felt thick with the weight of unfinished business. The familiar sights and sounds were a reminder of everything I had left behind, but now, I was here to face it all. I made my way to Kelechi's house, my nerves on edge. His home was at the far end of the village, near the path that led to the river. The memories of all the times we had walked this road together made my heart ache, but I pushed those feelings down. I had to stay strong. When I reached his house, I hesitated for a moment before knocking. A part of me wanted to turn back, but I couldn't. The door opened slowly, and there he was, looking surprised to see me. Neka, he said softly, stepping aside to let me in. We sat down in his small living room, the air between us thick with unspoken words. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was like we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. Finally, I broke the silence. I came back because I need to understand why. Why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you come to me that morning and tell me the truth? Kelechi ran a hand through his hair, his face full of regret. I thought I was protecting you. Neka. Obina threatened me. I was scared. Scared that I would lose you, scared that Obina might do something harmful to you or your family. But you lost me anyway, I said quietly. By leaving, you made that decision for me. You took away my choice. He nodded, his eyes filled with guilt. I know. And I've regretted it every day since. I didn't know how to fix what I had broken. That's why I ran. But I'm here now, and I'm not running anymore. I looked down at my hands, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to believe that we could start over, but another part of me was still so hurt. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I admitted. Kelechi reached out, gently taking my hand. I'll spend the rest of my life earning your trust back if that's what it takes. I just need you to give me a chance. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had once been my whole world. The pain was still there, but so was the love. I need time, I whispered. I can't promise anything, but I'm willing to try. Kelechi smiled, relief washing over his face. That's all I'm asking for. As we sat there, holding hands in the quiet of his home, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. A small step toward healing, toward maybe finding our way back to each other, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was uncertain, full of questions and fears. And as much as I wanted to believe in second chances, I also knew that some wounds took time to heal. For now, though, I was willing to take that first step. Only time would tell if it was the right one. Over the next few months, Kelechi and I took it slow, like we had promised. He didn't push, and I didn't rush. We talked, laughed, and even revisited old memories. But there was no pressure to fix everything right away. Slowly, trust began to grow between us again, not the same as before, but stronger in its own way. Kelechi understood now that love couldn't thrive without honesty, and I realized that I had to allow myself to heal and forgive, not just for him, but for me too. One afternoon, we sat by the river, our spot, where so much had begun and ended. The sky was a deep, clear blue, and the sound of the water rushing over the rocks was peaceful. It reminded me of all the times we had sat here, dreaming about our future. Today, though, the future didn't feel as uncertain as it once had. I've been thinking a lot about us, Kelechi said, his voice soft but certain. About what we've been through. I know I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you that day, but I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your trust. I want to build something new with you, something better. I looked at him, feeling the sincerity in his words. This was the Kelechi I had always loved, the man who cared deeply, who made mistakes but was willing to do the hard work to fix them, and I've been thinking too, I said, smiling a little. About how life doesn't always go the way we plan. But I've learned that sometimes, we have to go through the hard times to appreciate the good ones. I know I love you, Kelechi. I never stopped. And if you're willing to be patient with me, I want to try again too. His eyes lit up, and for the first time in a long time, I saw pure joy on his face. He reached out and took my hand, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I squeezed his hand, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I will never leave your side again. Nneka, he promised. No more running, no more secrets. Just us. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun begin to set over the horizon. The warm colors of the sky reflected in the river, and it felt like a symbol of our journey, of the light that had finally come after the darkness. In the months that followed, our bond grew stronger. We learned how to communicate better, how to lean on each other without fear. My family, especially my mother, welcomed Kelechi back with open arms. Even the village, once filled with whispers, now smiled at the sight of us together. They had seen our struggle, and now they saw our triumph. One evening, back at the river where our story had started, Kelechi stood in front of me, his eyes full of love. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. My heart skipped a bit as he knelt down on one knee, just like he had all those years ago. Nneka, I don't want to wait anymore, he said, his voice full of emotion. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me, for real this time? Tears filled my eyes, but they were tears of happiness, of relief, of finally feeling like everything had come full circle. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment, but then I whispered, yes, Kelechi. Yes, I'll marry you. The village celebrated our wedding with joy and excitement. This time, everything felt right. There were no secrets, no shadows of the past hanging over us. As we danced together, surrounded by the laughter of friends and family, I felt lighter than I had in years. Our love had been tested, but it had survived. And more than that, it had grown into something even stronger, built on honesty, trust, and forgiveness. Life had shown us that happiness wasn't about avoiding pain, but about learning from it and choosing love in spite of it. As we started our new life together, I knew that the journey ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be more challenges, more ups and downs. But this time, we would face them together, side by side, knowing that no matter what, we had each other, and that was enough. Moral of the story: true love isn't perfect. It's messy, it's hard, and sometimes it's painful. But real love, the kind that lasts, comes from forgiveness, from trusting each other again after you've been hurt, and from choosing each other every single day. It's not about avoiding mistakes, but learning from them and growing stronger together.
Thank you guys for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.